what has your experience been? Do blockchain companies need to have patents to secure funding? Angel investors, VC funding, or otherwise, and just kind of a general discussion having to do that based on your own experience, or and what you can add to the conversation there. And I guess I'd start with maybe Tom and Christian, see what you guys think about that.
That's a good question. I would say that I spent a long time in Silicon Valley and built a company there, and patents weren't really brought up as standard conversational points. I would say most companies there pretty much focused on winning through sheer network effect domination. If you look at Facebook as an example, pretty hard to take down, right? As a company that's entirely driven by network effect, which is what a vast majority of the companies out there are driven by. So if that is the case, if that's the kind of company that you're building, I would argue that the patentable technology probably doesn't matter as much, because you're just through sheer domination and owning the market through some sort of hypergrowth strategy, able to keep competitors at bay simply because of that. But then again, you sort of look at the, I guess, next phase of that, once they've become a dominant player, now they're starting to drive R&D around various patents. Even Facebook is starting to get into the game in a pretty big way. And I think they've risen in the ranks, and I think IBM's like #1 or something like that of all patents filed ever, right? And I think Facebook, is now in the top 10 at least. They weren't quite there before. But I think once you have the balance sheet, you can do stuff like that in a pretty significant way. I would bet that from a hardware perspective or pharmaceuticals, probably just depends on the industry and the business that you're in. Certain types of patents probably become more important. That would be my answer to that.
I just have a follow-up for you, Tom, too.
Yeah.
And that's that. So,
but I don't think it makes you don't have to worry about that from a fundraising perspective, at least,
sure,
depending on the category of business you're building.
For me, for those of you that don't know, Tom was a founder of a company, a website called Rally.org, and so which became it was a big company, right? And there's a great backstory, there's a great success story, and so I think that I'd love to hear. What sort of IP did you guys have at Rally? Was there anything innovative that you worked on? Did you guys ever pursue any, patents? Or I'm sure it certainly had some trademarks. I'm sure
we definitely had trademarks, mainly because people definitely tried to copy our brand,
right? And
then tried to represent themselves as us in other parts of the world. So we had to do a whole global trademark process on that to protect our ability to function as a fundraising platform in multiple jurisdictions. Mm-hmm. I think in terms of patentable tech, we came up with a lot of really cool stuff. Most of the stuff that we came up with was more, I would probably say, fraud prevention. Just different ways to, under the hood of Rally was basically a payments company, right? So we processed and moved money all over the world. We moved billions of dollars for politicians and nonprofits. And I think in terms of like what we did, that's honestly where PayPal had most of their innovations, actually, is in fraud prevention opportunities, because it's extraordinarily hard to get people to stop ripping you off. So we came up with some really cool things there. Nothing we ever really patented. Most of what I would say we did is we took a really broken payment system, and we put lipstick on a pig, and we made it work a little bit better by just sheer user experience and focusing on a particular industry vertical, and a lot of really good, just payment tech and user experience, I would say. But yeah, I would say most of the innovation probably happened more at the fraud prevention level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Christian, you want to weigh in?
Reluctantly, yeah. So, I mean, the caveat being, I think Gradient is I wouldn't say we're a blockchain company per se, but we have applications in the blockchain space, and therefore a lot of what we do would be classified as hardware development. Some of it is also distributed systems and more generally classified as blockchain. So, outside of that context, my background is in healthcare and medtech type things primarily, and in that space, establishing a core patent is essential for raising money generally. So coming from that background into a space that is that at least interfaces with blockchain has been very interesting and nuanced, which is why I say reluctantly, talking about patents. So when we raised our first funding round, we have fairly sophisticated investors who understand the value of patents long term. I would say in the blockchain space specifically, patents aren't, and they can actually be discouraging. And I think that's mostly a cultural, educational issue, which hopefully we get into today.
Sure.
So in terms of, is it important for raising your first round of funding? I would say no. I think, for us, we were at an interesting point where we build silicon, so it's a very capital-intensive industry. The incumbents, and I think this is another interesting challenge, less so about do you need patents for securing funding, and more about long-term strategy. There is a general assumption within or if not an assumption, a mentality within the blockchain community that patents are bad and patents inhibit innovation. I think that's actually potentially the opposite of what is the case. But coming from something like medtech, essentially what happens in the medtech industry and other capital-intensive industries is that every major player has their large their pile of patents, and you sort of have this mutually assured destruction process where if it's not formally documented, there's a general assumption that I won't sue you, you won't sue me. If I were to come to the table as an incumbent and not have any patent protection, and say, well, I just didn't believe in patenting, you're not going to get very far. So our strategy with regard to patents is, and I think we'll get into this later on, but if you think of, I can patent, I can open source license, and I can trade secret. I suppose I could just throw everything out in the public as well. Filing IP is I think it's the most general purpose option in terms of what you want to do in the future, and so that's kind of how we pursue things. So it gives us the ability to protect against large incumbents like an IBM, like an Intel. But of course, we love IBM and Intel if you're listening, and allows us the optionality in the future.
I would say I've only recently been exposed to patents as a viable thing that you need to do, but not in the sense of monetizing my own business, but protecting my business.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird.
Spending money to protect your business.
Spending money to protect my business so that somebody else doesn't walk away and say, oh, I did this thing 10 years ago because it's a first-to-file system.
Yeah.
And then, now I'm going to sue you because I happen to write a piece of paper faster. So we've actually built stuff and seen a patent come out. We're like, well, that sucks.
Yeah.
We built it.
Well,
it's funny.
Yeah. Something you brought up earlier, which I think is not immediately obvious, is that there are geographic distinctions on this cultural preference. So Silicon Valley is very, if you're raising money in Palo Alto or Menlo Park, I would say almost with certainty that no one cares if you have patents early on.
Yeah.
In fact, they may say, why are you wasting your time?
That's exactly what they say.
Yeah. May or may not have heard that one recently.
I've heard that 100 times.
In Boston, I think partly because of our medtech leaning and deep tech, it's sort of that makes a lot of sense. Don't put too much money there, but you should be doing that.
I think that's right, because in Silicon Valley, they're basically really good at building viruses that spread around the web.
Yeah.
Right? But it's called Facebook.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Well, Christian, I almost stopped you at the beginning of when you're kind of talking, because that was, I think it's a really important point. There was, I had asked more than 4 people to be as part of this panel that are members of the blockchain community, and there was a general aversion to want to talk about, even if the whole point of having them to come talk was to just talk about how they're utilizing open source. That some folks were generally just unwilling to have any sort of conversation, to even sit in a panel of people that were pursuing things in a proprietary way.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's indicative that people just have very strong feelings and are impassioned. It's something that's happening. It's quick. It's exciting. And there really are. There's many exciting, great things going on. But I think that what we wanted to have, is this kind of important conversation today about how I just don't think things are just black and white.
Yeah.
I think that with all of these things, that it's a business decision on a case-by-case basis. So.
Actually, just one
Yeah.
quick addition to that, because I imagine our investors would not be thrilled if we didn't clarify half a dozen things as quickly as possible. I think what is misunderstood is that filing a patent or even having a patent granted doesn't mean that I can't later on open source something. I can grant licenses however I feel like, and I think the reality is the vast majority of things, if not everything, is that's where we'll go. But again, it's the optionality early on that if I'm building something and my incumbent is a Fortune 10, I need some protections. And the related point of be curious to maybe get into what I think this is later on, but when people say open source versus patent, I think there is a general association between patent and black box. And when within the blockchain community in particular, and things that we work on that are related to security, integrity, and authenticity of core systems, when people say, I want this open source, what I actually hear when I get into the details is, I want to be able to audit exactly what you're doing. And I think those two, that plus and open source, are not the same thing. Well, those two may come together, but patent and auditability are not necessarily at odds.